approved them today, they just haven't yet.
22 grand.
So, Jeff, did you get an email from Scott Reese about that?
About-
Short-term rental?
I'll go look right now.
No, not right now, I'm saying. He sent an application, I wanted to know the deadline for the application.
Oh, okay. It may be that Bridget has, she's, I know we've been doing a lot of, yes, for, at the, above the small batch.
Yeah, when he wanted to
Yes,
get it in before that, you put it on this.
we did process that.
We don't know if it works, we're busy.
How are you today?
Oh, just great. You gonna sit next to Bob today? We can talk about
Or the, is it the White Thunder?
Bob's the guy.
He's the one to know.
He's the leader.
Good, how are you? How was your, I didn't get to see your race. How'd it go?
Pretty good. Well,
Where were you? You just sit there.
almost good enough.
Almost.
Second.
Oh, hey, that's.
But we sailed all the matches. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, it was good. Won a little bit of money, so.
Oh, do we need another?
I'm good. How about you?
It's good. Nice to be here.
Musical chairs.
Oh, yeah, you don't want that on the floor. Right, it's stuck. I'll close down for you.
Yeah, I've got one more big one next week. 2.5 weeks. And then I'll be done until probably October. So, yeah. I've done
Yeah, it's in my office. Thank you.
My feet might not touch the ground.
It's got super secret notes on it.
Oh, yeah.
I
am a lady.
How
are you?
How are you?
pretty good.
Hi, Jeff.
Why not?
It is possible.
Yeah. Should I or should I think so? Okay. So Jim. Crazy. Washed. Yesterday. As soon as the frost. I went down, semi started running.
Everybody who's coming is here. So, Vanessa won't be here.
We have enough to vote tomorrow. There's some ice on that.
So this isn't anything special, like a special land use, so we just need a majority vote of
Yeah.
quorum of the people. So it would be 5. And we have 8 here, so.
It's a good thing, so that maybe people can have a better shot.
Yeah.
If it's upside down.
Latitude 45. Yes. Not-
So I do it.
Towards the front.
Oh, I'm happy to do that. You have to get some. He said you spelled it correctly. I said, "Thank you." Stop, stop having more. I can do step. My step. What did you? Yeah, she said. She could not say this. Hi, Jeff.
Yeah.
No.
My mom said not to worry about you.
Doesn't matter what you do. Somebody's mad at you.
She brought it for all. She did it. I was like, don't do it.
Such an opportunity.
You're an elected office.
Too many skills going.
Sorry.
So if you apply your certain skills, then you're gonna do more of the work.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Not necessarily.
Just read in there. It's like-
No, it changed.
Yeah, we're gonna believe that.
Oh, yeah. She's so embarrassing.
It's like having employees and
She was so fun.
We have no one on Zoom, which is interesting. Just making sure, because there's usually somebody else.
No, I don't think that that either of them are joining us today.
This is messing me up. Everyone's sitting in different seats.
Oh, yeah.
You said four. It's like there.
Try to guess.
Two meetings in a row. You're 2 for 2.
No.
Well, if you want to see specific seats, you gotta get the plaques up first.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's a good point. Started.
Especially on the freeway. So,
All right, it's 5:30. Let's call this meeting to order. And Jeff, would you care to take roll, please?
Absolutely. Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
Emily DeBay.
Here.
Bob Toma.
Here.
George Peak.
Here.
Bill Mulder.
Here.
Mark Bidet.
Here.
Barry Lustgarten.
Here.
Al Dyken.
Here.
We have 8. We have 4.
Excellent, thank you, Jeff. I want to thank planning commission members for coming back tonight. This is a special meeting. We met, our regular meeting was last week. I want to thank Victor and Jeff, city staff, for coming out for another meeting tonight, one more evening meeting that you guys have to help us with. And members of the public, thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. The only thing on the agenda tonight, and the reason for this special meeting, is to discuss a proposal by a resident about the idea of placing a moratorium on short-term rental licenses granted in the city of Harbor Springs in this year in residential zones. So that's the proposal from resident Sue Winter, who's done a lot of thinking on this and a lot of research. Planning Commission felt it was promising enough and important enough that we come back together tonight to explore this idea. The Planning Commission does not have the authority to put a moratorium in place. That belongs to City Council. And City Council is meeting on Monday night. Is that right?
That's right.
And they could elect to consider what comes out of our meeting tonight, or they may decline to act on that or to even consider it again. But since time is of the essence regarding the start of our season, we thought it warranted getting that together and getting some input from you all. So that's why we doubly appreciate you coming out tonight. All right. We often ask for public comment and correspondence on something not on the agenda. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share about something other than short-term rentals that we should consider?
Well, I do have to, once again, ask the committee's position on my conflict of interest, because I do have a short-term rental. It's in a B1 district, and I can either participate and not vote, or not participate and not vote. But either way, I have to recuse myself because I do have a conflict of interest.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Commissioners, what's your feeling on the way Mark should address this tonight?
Are we voting on something tonight?
Potentially.
Okay.
I'd be happy for him to participate but not vote.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought at the last meeting, we had decided that he would participate but not vote because we had one dissenting vote.
And I think it makes sense to review this every single time, just so we're totally
I
crisp
think
on
it's a
it.
good thing.
I would value Mark's input in the discussion, so I would support that as well. All right, so that's been decided.
Thank you.
Great. Any other public comment on something other than short-term rentals? All right, great. Well, then let's go over the proposal that's been put together by Sue Winter. Sue, would you care to give us the highlights of?
I'm not prepared.
Okay.
I'm not qualified.
You're funny qualified.
I'm not certified. I mean, I just, I think that it's time. I really want to thank you, Bill, and Al Dyke, because nobody else is willing to stand up and bring this forward. So thank you so much, Al, and you too, Bill, for not putting it on the back burner. And that's really my main motivation. You know, I think every year it seems like there's maybe 10 more short-term rentals and another 10. And so I just think the city should decide how many are we going to allow? Are we going to just let the whole town go short-term rentals? And I know it's many communities have gone through this, and we're the last one actually that I know of. There might be one other lakeshore town that has still really not addressed it, but we are really late in the game. So especially good that you two stepped up on this. I don't know.
Well, thanks. Can you give us just a succinct description of why you think a moratorium makes sense right now?
Well, because I would imagine there's people down at the realty office right now ready to get their house. I mean, I know we don't have a lot for sale. I think there's 2 maybe, but you know, they deserve to know what's going on in our city. They deserve to know if the city is thinking of you know, limiting short-term rentals. Why, I mean, I just think they deserve to know, realtors deserve to know, residents deserve to know. And if somebody's ready to sign for a house or put over their cash, and, you know, and then they've got this great plan to fix it up. Oh, I'm gonna, you know, do these really cute bedrooms, and suddenly the city's, you know, oh, oops, no more. I mean, I think there's a timeliness.
So it's a fairness issue and.
Yes,
All
yep.
right, great. Let's review some facts first, and then maybe we open up the public comment and get your thoughts on it. So let's talk about the facts. Last year, in the 2021 season, we had about 67 short-term rental licenses granted in the city.
How many?
67. And so far this year, we have 33 processed applications that licenses have been granted. There's another 22 to be processed, so that's 55 right now, as of this point. And Sue tells me that she's spent all weekend scouring the rental sites, and she found what she believes to be
91.
91 listings for short-term rentals.
Were those all within the city limits or?
Limits, and I didn't count weekly, and there are some there. But I'm not sure where the city limit goes in weekly.
Artesian.
Another question for Jeff and or Victor. At one stage last year, we hired an auditing firm to go through all of those websites. Do we know how many short-term rentals they found?
That's a complicated answer, but we are continuing to contract with Harmari, which is an organization that helps with compliance of short-term rental management. What they do for us is they scour Airbnb, VRBO, and I think a few other websites, looking for listings, verifying what the addresses of those are. We provide them with our list of ones that we have processed. They then enter in and send out a mailing with a letter that we've generated to the remainders of people that are listing but don't have active licenses. And we do, I believe, 2 mailings per year to get everybody on board with an active license. The difficulty is there's a lot of duplicates on that. So Harmari, last time I looked, there's over 275 listings. The trouble with that though is if I have a home and I have it listed, but then I sell that home to Victor and Victor lists it and I never remove my listing, we now have duplicate listings. We also have situations where there are homes that used to be short-term rented that are not rented anymore, but the listing is still out there. There's also a number of people that maybe they chose this year to not short-term rent their home, but they left their ad up, but show it booked all year, because that way next year it's easy for them to just take that listing back down. Okay. So it's a lot of work to work with them to manage the data that they provide, but they do provide a lot of data and they have been a substantial help in keeping up on the situation.
More facts. We did an analysis of last year's 67 licenses, and 40 of those were in single-family residential zoning districts. And that's the kind of the nucleus of concern that I'm hearing in the community is short-term rentals in residential districts. So that was about 60% of our total, and 40% are in other zoning districts. I think the last bit of information that we need to work on in order to comment tonight would be the actions that the city took earlier this year regarding short-term rentals and the management of those. And that came out of a big meeting that we had last August with about 100 people, and tons of solutions and ideas were brainstormed there. And we took those and put them into categories about those that were could be effective and could be fairly easy to implement. And they were things like a brochure that has to be given out to renters that talks about being a good neighbor. And we set occupancy limits for different rentals. Victor, do you recall what else was on there?
We also improved our enforcement process. So instead of sending out, following our zoning enforcement process where we send out 2 to 3 letters, we're shortening that process to 1 letter and then violation. We expedited our suspension hearing process. We had 1 suspension hearing last year, and we gave the clerk the more flexibility to suspend a license for longer and or revoke a license easier. So I think those were the main changes to the.
So we took the actions, or the city took the actions that were possible pretty quickly to start out the year. And those we haven't seen the effects of those yet. So that's a fact that we need to consider as well. And the city put those in place to try to address some of the most egregious behaviors and concerns, but we haven't seen how those are going to work yet. Trying to think of any other facts that you need before we start. Just hold on to that, David. Oh, the other thing is, so tonight, we don't need to argue the merits or drawbacks of short-term rentals as a concept themselves, actually. And there'll be plenty of time for that. My thought is the way that we address this year is we have another big, full community meeting, have a thorough discussion here at the Planning Commission and in perhaps like town hall format type meeting, really get input. We do it in August when everybody's in town and no one can accuse us all of doing anything in the dark of night or the dead of winter when people can't participate. So that the Planning Commission has that on our agenda for this summer, is to have a thorough community conversation and then to take some discussion and decide if additional action makes sense for the city or if it doesn't. So again, tonight, before us is a question of, would it make sense to stop the train in residential neighborhoods at some point, at some particular date yet to be named here this spring, so that it doesn't explode and concern the community farther. Commissioners, any other questions of fact or background at this point? Okay, could I have a motion to open it up to public comment?
Bill, before you do that, can I just say a few words about a moratorium, because that is the issue we're be discussing, is whether the need for a moratorium. So local governments derive our power from the state legislature, and the state legislature does not explicitly allow for moratoriums. So that means we have to tread very carefully when we do impose a moratorium. Generally, lower courts have upheld moratoriums, but they have not upheld moratoriums that last longer than 6 months. So if we are going to make a moratorium, we need to be serious about acting quick as opposed to delaying it till late summer or fall. Other things to keep in mind is that a moratorium should be created in the context of protecting public health, safety, and the general welfare of the public. So we have to have support or reasons, findings of fact on why short-term rentals are posing a direct threat to, let's say, general welfare. Now, general welfare is a very broad and vague term. It can mean, upholding, threats or addressing threats to morality, safety issues, peace and quiet, law and order. So there's room there, but we need to make sure that the reasons that we are offering are legitimate and they're that can be upheld in a challenge in court. And we also have to have a narrow scope when we do a moratorium. We can't. I think the idea of going at targeting more short-term rentals in residential districts is on that path of more of a narrow scope. But you can't just be so broad that you would prevent a private property owner from doing something with their property or addressing it in one particular issue, but not addressing another issue. For example, one could be, let's say you're trying to target short-term rentals. Let's say the reason is, I'm not saying that this is a reason, but the reason is noise. Short-term people and short-term rentals are noise. You could also say, well, why do you have to target short-term rentals? Why don't you make an ordinance about noise or moratorium on certain things, ordinances about noise? So you gotta be very careful in how we make recommendations to council about why we're doing this. It needs to be specific. And the reason why you want to do that is you want to be able to uphold any challenge that might go to court, because most communities that have imposed some sort of moratorium usually end up in court. Usually the moratorium is lifted by the time it gets resolved through court, so it ends up being a moot point, but you still want to be able to uphold that. And again, no courts have so far in Michigan allowed a moratorium to last longer than 6 months. So I just want people to keep that in mind when if we do decide to do a moratorium, we need to be as specific, narrow as possible and have legitimate reasons that target addressing a threat to public safety, health, or general welfare.
Great, thank you, Victor. All right. Would commissioners care to open it up for public comment at this point? Sure.
I'll make that motion.
Motion's open. Motion's on the table to open up for public comment. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. For the people that care enough to come out tonight, thank you again very much. The way that we do this is that each person gets to speak once. You get a 3-minute time slot. You stand and introduce yourself, your name and address, and you speak to folks at the table. not other people in the audience. And we would love to hear what you have to say. David?
David Cuckelman, 545 State Street, Harbor Springs. I have one clarification based on what was just said. What is the license fee at the present time? This is not, the real question I have has to do with the moratorium, but what is, could you clarify that? What is the license fee?
The current license is $400, and that's an annual fee.
Okay. So my question concerning the moratorium is related to what you said about 237 or whatever it was that they found on there. What's your realistic estimate of how many, if we have 67 that last year and we have 40 some this year, how many do we think are renting that realistically renting that don't have licenses?
Harmari, their goal, most of these compliance companies, Harmari, Granicus, Host Compliance, they all advertise that they want to get you to approximately 85% compliance. That 85% of the active short-term rentals within your community would be licensed and have paid their fees. I think that we were very close to that this last year. At the time when we had our 67 that were processed and we did our second mailing, we only sent out that mailing to, I think it was 14 or 15 other properties. And most of those people came in with legitimate reasons of, to describe why there was a listing out there, but that they weren't actually actively renting. There may have been a few that fell through the cracks, but I think that we were close to that 85%.
So to answer the question,
So
probably around.
probably close to the 90 that Sue mentioned.
David, is it wrap it up? Okay.
Linda Rockwitz, 519 East Third Street. I just have a question. Is by moratorium, do you mean there would be no short-term rentals in residential areas for the span of this moratorium, or there would be no additional more?
Good question. That will depend on how, if the commission wants to recommend a moratorium, how it would be structured.
I can tell you the safest way legally would be no new applications.
As of some date.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mine's a question, Janet Stewart, 410 Pine Street. I'm just trying to understand the real issue with short-term rentals. So if there are 90 people who applied, one person wants to rent it for 1 week, a full week. 20 people want to rent it all summer long in 2 and 3 day increments. We're not talking about trying to define what is allowable in a short term, or just overall limit the number regardless of how many times that particular residence is rented during the summer and for what periods.
Everybody's going to have different thoughts on that, but what I picked up from my conversations in the community is just a concern about the fact that a house in your neighborhood is being rented by people you don't know, and people come and go. Now, we do have a definition for what a short-term rental is. It's 7 days or less, I think it is.
30 days or less, non-reoccurring.
Okay, yeah. So 30 days or more would be a seasonal rental, which would be, okay.
I just know that I think there's I'm sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
different feeling
Yeah.
if your next door neighbor is constantly renting all summer long to all sorts of different people versus, for instance, somebody renting for 28 days. And only once out of it.
Got it. Yeah, I see the distinction.
And how many total residences are in the city proper?
We have about 1,200 housing units in the city, actually 1,180 something, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Leona Davis, 325 East Third. So I'm curious, how many complaints were received last year? Like formally filed complaints for short-term rentals? Does anybody have an idea on that?
I think that's a two-prong answer. The first one would be, because I think we have to define and separate complaints into two categories. The first category would be complaints regarding specific issues going on at a location. Like if there was a garbage issue or a parking issue or noise, those tend to be the most typical. And we really did not receive very many of those. We received a number of them in quick succession regarding one property and one issue that was going on. After the fact, we had another issue about fireworks that were going on the day, but realistically, we didn't receive many of those types of complaints. Very few, actually. We receive, annually a number of complaints about the general idea of the change in character and feel of the community that short-term rentals are having. And that's harder to define. But we get more of those than we do of actual complaints of problems at a location. People are very rarely do people make those complaints. And we actually, at our last meeting last year, they talked about that they're maybe unwilling to make complaints.
Some people are afraid to make complaints and to make reports.
For the first category of complaints, I'd say we had probably about 3 properties last year that were complained about from a handful of people on different occasions.
So would it not be wiser to address those individual properties, which I realize you are with the protocols that you have in place, rather than just slice everybody off from the process? I just don't understand the whole need for a moratorium when there's so few. I did 67 listings and I did by 90 days, that's like 6,080 days of rentals, and out of 6,080 days of rentals, there's 3 or 4 complaints. That doesn't seem justified to me. That's just a thought that I have.
Great, I thank you for bringing that up, Leon. That's a great point. So that's the counter argument to this whole thing. And I think it's totally valid and something that we need to consider. What we learned in our big community meeting last year is that there are behavior concerns, there are noise and drunkenness and bonfires and that kind of thing, which can be addressed to a degree. We talked about hiring a specific enforcement officer for short-term rentals, and we couldn't afford that, and the community didn't think that was a good idea. What Leona brings up is that what she brings up doesn't address just the general anger and frustration about houses being used as short-term rentals in our community. And there's rumbling, lower lying anger in the community about that I get talked to all the time about. And the people could be perfectly well behaved, the landlords and owners could be superb, could vet the people, but it still just is different. It's different and changes the neighborhood in the way that you feel about it. We're not alone by any means. People all over the world are meeting tonight talking about this. People in Michigan communities are doing the same thing constantly. So it's a vexing issue and there are great arguments on both sides. I definitely see Leona's point. If it's behavior that we're concerned about, then let's just address that.
So what happened with, I was just curious what happened with what was before the legislature on short-term rentals, because there was some activity going on.
Essentially stalled. It has
Stalled still.
It hasn't moved forward.
So are we within, is council, is the city within our rights to do something when it's still in an active state, even though it's in a stalled state, it's still active, it's not been tabled?
Yes, council still has ability to, I'll caveat that, council can still issue whatever ordinance they want on short-term rentals. However, many of those are challenged, whether it's a ban on short-term rentals, a limit on short-term rentals, or allowing short-term rentals. All short-term rental ordinances by multiple cities are being challenged. So there really isn't a clear case law from a Michigan Supreme Court on it. And that's why the Michigan legislature is trying to act. So in the meantime, it's kind of proceed at your own risk. as it has been for the past several years.
To bring everybody else up to date on that question, great question, thank you. There is a bill pending in the House, Michigan House and Michigan Senate, which would forbid communities from regulating short-term rentals through zoning. And that was modified to say that if 30% or less of the community's housing were short-term rentals, then they could not regulate through zoning. But if it crept up to more than 30%, then the city or municipality could regulate it through zoning. And there are other ways to regulate it. Other cities that we talked to have put their regulations in their city code rather than their zoning code. And so the city code has to do with health and welfare and safety. And those are standing in there. Quite a number of restrictions, limits, and different approaches used by Michigan resort communities. Kyle, did you get this?
I just going to confirm what Jeff and Victor said. I've asked officers to give me a copy of every report and do a report on every complaint we get on short-term rental. And last year we had 6 of them occurred at the same address, all in June. And then we had our hearing and we haven't had a complaint at that residence, I don't believe, since then. And then one was on Glen Drive and there was another one further up on State Street.
So,
How many complaints did you have about local residences?
I didn't track that, sorry. Just off the top of my head, we get probably 1 a week. Whether it's a fire or loud music or, you know, I'm just a guess. I mean, I will start, that's a good question. I'll start tracking.
Yeah,
So-
go again. Sure.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I'm thinking short bursts. So it's, if there's 1,200 residences, you say, and
1,200 housing units.
1,200 housing units, and there's 67
There
from
were
last year.
There could be 90 this year.
That's less than 6%.
Approaching 7.5% perhaps.
That's a very small amount, given the
Some might think so,
30%.
some might not think so.
Right.
Yeah, depends on. Let's back row. I can't see you.
Ann Troszczynski, 465 State Street. So you're kind of asking for a list, is what I heard at the top of the meeting. So at the top of the list for me, as a person who lives in the neighborhood with short-term rentals, and I listen to the short-term rental, and my neighbors who talk to each other constantly about the problems they're experiencing. I would put at the top of the list, they don't belong in residential neighborhoods. Because at least in my block and for a couple of blocks around, we're all people who bought our houses in whatever condition they were. Mine happened to be one of the worst conditions in town. We've been working on them for a lot of years. We plan, many of us, most of us, to turn them from summer resort homes into lifelong family homes. In my neighborhood, there's a family whose grandchildren moved in with them. And that family, those kids are probably going to grow, and at least some family member is going to plan to stay in that house forever. So we bought them because it was in a family neighborhood. We started fixing them up. We see that the people who are moving in are kind of like ourselves in a good way. They're improving property, they're improving the streets, the neighborhood, kind of get together, they look out for each other. We felt safe before the short-term rentals came in. And now when the short-term rentals have come in, they neglect the properties. They never interact with the community whatsoever. They don't, when they're there, they don't talk to any of us, even when we make overtures. Their guests don't interact with us. They kick their footballs into my yard and send their dogs barking at me constantly anytime I open the door and so on. They don't have the same kind of care, respect, appreciation for what the neighborhood is. They don't value what Harbor Springs is, only from a marketing standpoint. They can make money off us because we are friendly, we're safe, we're family, and we're historic and really good looking in every single way. I think that's what we need to preserve. So I think short-term rentals have no place in a residential neighborhood, and that should be the #1 item on the list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, go ahead.
I look at it as the ones I see on our streets, I think of them almost as businesses. I don't know who owns them. And, you know, the people come and go. And why wouldn't you? What a great business, you know, you buy a house and you get it paid for by other people. So I agree, a residential area needs to maintain that residential feel.
Fred Roberts, 519 East Third Street. I agree with Linda on the business thing. And it's also the advantage that they not only make a business of it, they make a business that's not where they are. If there are problems. And I'd like to come in on the 7.5%. That strikes me as a high percentage of homes in an area to have in a program like this. Strikes me as quite high.
Thank you very much. Carolyn?
Carolyn Candler, 151 East Summit, close to State Street and by the high school. And we bought here because it's a resort community. We love the atmosphere of different people coming to visit all the time. We didn't buy here to raise our kids, you know, obviously we already did that. We have a short-term rental 2 doors from us. And we have had great experiences with it. We've met a lot of the people that come. The owners have a great person that manages it. There's never a problem with trash. We've never had a problem with noise. We've just had such a positive experience that, and I also feel it's difficult to find places for even your family to stay here. So I'm thrilled that we can potentially rent something on my block for my family. So that's my opinion.
Good, different experience. Thank you.
Margie Marks, 818 Arbor Street. Short-term rentals have come directly next door to us just recently. And I have to say there's been a positive piece at first. The owners are lovely. We wish they lived there, and I told them so. They live in Virginia. They seem to have a pretty good property manager. I made it a point to introduce myself and to start a good relationship with these people. I knew they were turning it into a rental. All that being said, it does really change the vibe of the street. It just does. There's a couple other rentals on Lake Street and Arbor. The feeling of community is really disjointed. You just don't feel it. I do understand that piece of, you know, how nice it might be to rent for people who are coming in. But the whole idea of community really is getting fractured. And that's what I feel. So I know what you're saying, Bill, people coming to you and chewing your ear about it. And I get that. So far, I haven't had noise issues, had some dog poop issues, and I got right on the phone actually with the homeowner because I started the relationship. But I think if we go down this road, where will we wind up? I think we have to take a bird's eye view of this. So if right now we have 67 short-term rental licenses in the city, 33 are in process, and 22, again, to be processed. I might have the wording wrong. But that's another, as you said at the top of the meeting, that's 55 that could now be added. I think if we don't put a cap on it, we're setting ourselves up for just being a rental community. Who are we? I think that's what we have to ask ourselves is really, who are we?
Just a clarification, the
Yes.
67 was a total number of licenses for
For
2021.
2021.
And now 55 is not new licenses, it's how many we have for 2022. So
Okay,
they're
thank you.
annual license, so
Thank you.
just a clarification. on
Thank you.
that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Excuse me, another clarification, if you guys could. So of the 1,180 housing units we have, How many of those are like single family residential homes? Because that figure was broken out in the number of licenses that were issued, but not in the overall
I don't know,
housing
a single
units.
family, we do have
There's-
1/3 or.
So
just
there's
under 1/3.
1,180
Yeah.
residential properties within the city of Harbor Springs. Some of those residential properties may be vacant lots. We don't have very many of those left. Most of them are in the single family residential district, so it will be a single family home. Some of them may be in the R2 district, which permits duplexes, and some of them may be in the central business district that are condominium units above commercial businesses. So it's difficult to get an actual breakdown of the specific number of dwelling units. But that's the number that we were able to get.
About 30% of those are. Permanent.
About
Year-round
30 to
residents.
35% are people that occupy their home as their principal residence.
Yeah, so that figure, you know, we feel it, but just so everybody gets it again, only 35% of our homes here are, you know, have the principal residence exemption, which means that your primary residence. The other 65%, or 2/3 are something else. So that's something to keep in mind.
May I make a brief comment?
Sure.
Just a clarification on what you said, Bill. I read that in the paper too, but of that other 65% or whatever it is, many of those are people who are here in the summer. They're just not here, they didn't claim homestead.
That's right.
So they're not here year round, but and we exclude them from voting. There are all kinds of issues associated with that, but we just need to be clear that that's not an accurate number of people who live in Harbor Springs during the summer when the short-term rentals
That's correct.
really
So,
take off.
yeah, there was no value judgment with those numbers. We value our seasonal residents. We value every property owner. We serve every property owner, whether it's their, you know, whether it's their principal residence or it's not. You can only vote in one place under US law, so you have to pick one place or another. So anyway, no disparagement. We value everybody and we serve everybody.
Those people are paying higher taxes too,
Yeah.
much higher taxes.
Much higher taxes.
Much higher taxes.
Just to clarify, none of that goes to the city. It goes to the school district. It's extra. Okay, but yes, they are.
Contributing, what I'm saying is they're contributing.
They are
Highly
definitely
contributing.
contributing, very much, yes. We value them. Maggie, you said everything was good on Third Street one time at a meeting last year regarding rentals and all that. What's your sense of, what's the density of rentals in your block?
Well, we have 1, 2, 3. That third one has probably 2 others, so let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Probably 10 or more.
Out of 20
Just, just my block, yeah, probably actually. Yeah.
on both sides of the street?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't, you know,
what-
in my block, you know, I look at it as a contribution to our city for the downtown, people coming here and it, you know, because people can enjoy it. We don't have a hotel, we don't have that, well, we have Point Lynn, but it's packed, you know, and trying to get another place is very difficult if you don't, you know, plan ahead. And I get calls, you know, people are like, you know, can I rent your place? I'm like, no. Yeah, but I think if they're managing it well, you know, I still see it as a community. I like seeing the different people around me, you know, they engage with us. So I think it all depends on what block you're on. Our block
What,
is
do you know what
very-
your zoning is? Are you,
R2, right? Yeah.
you're R2?
R2. Yeah. So, but I do see, I can understand the other communities where it is very much, I'm down, I feel like I'm really downtown, right? That's expected to be in that area. You know,
That's really interesting about the density. Thank you. Sue.
Sue Winter, State Street. I just think it comes down to what obligation do our neighborhoods have to host tourists? I mean, I understand if I'm making money from it, I'm gonna be a lot more, excited about it. But, are we, putting up with hotels next to us so that more whitefish dinners can be sold? Maybe we're already enough whitefish dinners being sold. I mean, what obligation do we have? I think that's the core thing. I mean, are all the neighbors going to have to leave? Because it's not that pleasant to live next to, revolving people you don't know so I don't know.
Yeah, and I just wanna make sure, I agree that there needs to be balance, and unfortunately, we might not have that capability to do that. And you still have the privilege of the ownership of your property, So this is a very difficult situation, but I totally understand all aspects of this, but my wish list would be to have only a percentage in balance, or have it areas that you have it not, but then you're tapping into the privilege of owning property. How do you control that?
I think it's a zoning issue.
Yeah.
Chair Mulder,
It's really a zoning issue.
if I just interject, I think these are all valuable comments, but I think our main purpose here is to decide whether or not we should support a moratorium.
It is indeed, Victor.
And I think the main question to ask here is, do we need a moratorium to address the issue that we're gonna address, or do we not need a moratorium? And what are the pros and cons of having a moratorium?
Agreed.
Anyway, I think they're all valuable comments, but either way, whether there is or not a moratorium, we are gonna address these issues.
Yes. So I guess our plan as a planning commission is to have a thorough community conversation this summer about all these advantages and disadvantages, and figure out if there's a balance or limits or no limits or what we do. So we're intending to do that. I'd like to do it in August, about a year from when we did our last one. So the question is, as Victor says, does it make sense for a moratorium to be put into place in residential areas as of some particular date coming up? All right, members of the public, thank you so much for your
Quick question.
for thoughtful
Are you
comments.
happy with that?
With,
With a meeting in 4 months? You just got done telling us the time was of the essence.
if there's a moratorium, we would need to do a meeting earlier. Because I don't think having a public meeting in August will allow us to then dissect all that information, planning commission, bring it to council to meet the time constraints of 6 months.
Well, yeah, all you can do is vote for next year.
Yeah, so I would, and really what we face here as an issue is that we know our short-term rental properties make their money in the summer. So we'd probably be more likely to face some sort of challenge if we do some sort of moratorium right now, when they're probably already booked.
Absolutely.
Or being booked right now. So we just have to be very careful on how we apply that. But if there is a moratorium, I'd say we tackle this next planning commission meeting. I mean, next month, we start right away if we do put a moratorium, because we can't keep a moratorium going. However, as Bill had mentioned, we had planned to discuss this anyway. So that's where the question is, do we need a moratorium or do we want a moratorium? I think if we phrase a moratorium in the way no new applications will be given out, we already have 55 being processed. I mean, we're talking about just shortage of a dozen from what we did last year. So we'll make a noticeable difference in the community. I don't know the answer to that question. But anyway.
All right, well, good. Let's get on to discussing it then. Can I have a motion to close the public comments?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second
Is there
that.
a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you again, members of the public, commissioners. Now the question comes to you, based on what you heard, what you're hearing in the community. Do you believe that it would make sense to put a moratorium of some type into place as of some date in the very near future, so that we can give this a thorough review and more discussion?
I think we need to go forward with the moratorium. We need to slow this problem down. If it's only 12, that's 12 fewer problems.
Is it a problem?
It is for me. I've got them around my house. They're noisy.
Is it a problem for the community?
It is. I think it's taking the community apart. We're fighting about it. I moved here because it was a nice residential district I bought into. I never locked my house. I never locked my car. Now I've got who knows what next door to me. I lock my house when I'm in my house. Even when I'm gone, when I'm home, my car's locked. I don't trust those people. They're drinking all the time. They're staring in my windows and taking pictures and keeping me up all hours. It's a problem. And my personal belief is that they don't belong in residential districts, period.
Where do they belong?
Pardon?
Where do they belong?
They belong in the business district. That's where businesses belong. They don't belong in a residential area. Michigan Court of Appeals said basically short-term rentals don't qualify as residential houses. And so if they're not residential, they shouldn't be in a residential district. And I think we need to do a moratorium to slow things down and give ourselves 6 months, if that's all we can do, to get this issue done and behind us and come to some sort of solution. Limit stays to at least a week. Get rid of the party people that I'm getting next door to me that come in for 2 days, party and leave, and then followed up by another party. So if we could put a minimum stay on it and maybe 7 days, maybe 2 weeks, that would do a lot to help with the neighborhoods, keep them a little more like a neighbor, and get businesses out of the neighborhoods. I get what I want to do.
I agree with you. So what about the idea of a moratorium? What advantages does it bring for the community?
It gives us a breathing space to finally come to a decision on what we need to do with it. Ban them completely, change the amount of stays, put them in non-residential districts, whatever we can do. Yeah, it'll give us the time to work on it instead of just saying, we'll do it next year. This will put pressure and make us do it. So I think the moratorium would be a step in the right direction.
If there's any other thoughts on a moratorium?
Just to be clear, you would propose not only a moratorium on the number of licenses issued, but also length of stay, right?
Well, I think the moratorium.
Moratorium is just to stop.
Moratorium would essentially be to stop issuing licenses for a certain time.
Got it. Okay, just being clear. He was.
I mean, you could be more specific, if you really want to, you could say stop issuing licenses in residential areas. You could say, other things, but I think that'd be much more harder to etch out. So I think what we're looking at is a moratorium on new licenses, from what I understand.
And I consider the moratorium as just a stopgap until we address the issue of rentals, short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. That's the issue for me.
I feel the same way, that this is like a pause button that we would be hitting. Because there's, I'd like to compliment the gathering here. You presented very balanced, well thought out positions, just across the board. Thank you for that. Because on the other side of the coin, it's just like, if we put a moratorium in, as Victor said, as we put health, safety, and welfare, we have to tie to those things very specifically. And we've given some information that I think we could hang our hats on. But at the same time, though, some of the others on one side, the position of, the right of property, what you can do with your own property. That's something that has to be weighed too, to some degree, and considered. And that's not really for us to decide tonight, but making the decision, it has to be, as Victor said, very specific, very narrow, and otherwise it will be challenged. I'm sure, someone's not going to be happy with this, and whether we do it to the point where we say, some people maybe haven't renewed yet, and all of a sudden they can't renew. They're going to be unhappy. So I don't know if we should consider anybody who already has a license that has renewed, that they can still renew their license. I'll just throw that out on the table for y'all to think about. But I can definitely see if we do go down this path of a moratorium, which, you know, the old saying is, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And to some degree, we haven't decided how deep this hole is or things like that. But, you know, hitting a pause button, in my opinion, isn't a horrible thing at this point. May make sense, but it does have to be very narrow and very specific to health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Do we know how many licenses that are new this year?
I don't have that breakdown. I can find that out though.
Barry, how's this strike you?
I mean, it just seems like we may be, I don't know, it seems like we're kind of late for this, you know, with 55 current licenses that are either processed or in process compared to, you know, 12 short from last year. You know, how effective is this going to be for where we may get some repercussion from this by imposing it? So for 12, maybe a handful more than that, is it worth pushing through to get that repercussions from the public for that? So I don't know, something we need to consider as well. But I agree, something needs to be done and we just need to figure out how that's done. But I just kind of worry for that handful, is it worth pushing through with this? And I'm not saying we shouldn't keep having these conversations and doing things about it, but.
Thank you. Bob, you're looking thoughtful. Does it strike you?
Mixed emotions about the whole thing. I'm not sure. I don't like telling people what they can and can't do with their property. I lived in Harbor Cove for 4 years, across from a heavily short-term rented condominium building. So what? People came, people left, people said hello, people said goodbye. There was never an issue. I enjoy the diversity that weekly rentals bring in the summer. It's good to see people of other likes besides, I mean, look in this room. You know, I mean, we're like a just leaf binder. It's anyway, I'm not in favor of it. Yeah.
You're not
right
in favor
now.
of a moratorium. So
Yeah,
you'd be, okay,
not in favor of the whole idea right now.
whole idea of a moratorium.
Yes, and of regulating.
Of regulating at all.
Or maybe capping. But I'm certainly not in favor of saying no more.
No more this year.
Ever.
That would be a moratorium.
Yeah, well, that maybe you could talk me into, but not allowing any short-term rentals next year.
So that's our decision down the road is that, I think the decision before us now is, do we hit the pause button for some amount of months? You know, stop the clock as of June 1, for instance, just as a working day. Say anybody who hasn't applied by June 1st, that's all we're granting. You've got 30 days. If you want to get a license, and you better apply and we'll give you, you know, we'll review it with the same standards that we review all our licenses with. So that could give people 30 days notice.
In that group, there's a certain number of people who are trying to afford the dream that we have, okay? By renting a property that they bought for the future.
Sure.
That they can become us.
If they have the dream, they can have the dream. There's nothing that says they have to have a place here. They can't afford it, they wait till they can. I don't see why they should be able to buy a house next to me, turn my life upside down, just so 10 years from now, they can finally afford to have a house. If they can't afford it, they don't live here. That's the way it works.
Okay, so that's the macro discussion now. So
Yeah.
what's before us tonight is the idea of a moratorium proposed by President Sue Winters. Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, I do. I just don't know if some of the things we're making some assumptions about how people are thinking about their properties. And I think we need to think about like factual information. And I'm in favor of putting a hold just to see, I think, if we had 67 last year, we have 55 so far, possibly for this year, I think it might show us, after all that hard work we did last summer with the actions that we want to make on short-term rentals, we could see maybe how those actions unfold, if we need to do the next phase of actions. So we'll have a similar amount of short-term rentals to compare to, and then we can still have the town hall in August when more people are here and get their input. I think it's really important to think about factual things and not make assumptions about any people.
George.
Rick, was the property next to you a short-term rental when you bought your home? Was the property next to you a short-term rental when you bought your home?
No, it was a seasonal home. I had neighbors that I knew, and they were here for 4 or 5 months a year, and we knew them, they knew us, and we had great fun. And ever since the last 2 years, it's been miserable.
That seems to be the change that's happened in the last 5-10 years is it used to be, it was a seasonal community where you owned a home up here and you used it. If you used it seasonally, you used it yourself. And the short-term rentals weren't there when I moved here. And it just seems to be a recent phenomenon, and that's accelerating. There seemed to be for some people, an urgency to get a house and so they can rent it out because there's not much stock out there.
Yeah, I'm in favor of some sort of moratorium. Barry's point is 100% accurate. Maybe we're a little late. However, there are a lot of people here who are really concerned about this, and I think we need to show the community that we're here and we're advocating for a lot of voices, and that we're actually going to do something. And this seems like a pretty good way to just kind of put things on hold, and we'll see how this summer goes, and maybe the good neighbor policies and the stuff that we've done earlier, that will come good and the experiences will be a little bit better. I think that the percentage of short-term rentals to dwelling units that we have here is fairly high for a small town. So I think that that's a reasonable thing to do, is to put a moratorium on the number of new applicants.
All right. I'm hearing an interest in a moratorium. We haven't really zeroed in on what it would be structured like. And that might help us decide if we would support it or not support it. Would you like to do some on-the-fly design here and see what we can rough out and see if how that appeals to us? All right, what if we said it would take effect, if there wasn't a moratorium, it would take effect June 1. It would be a moratorium for residential, so R1, A, B, C, and E. Is that right, Jeff? Would be our single-family residential districts.
Yeah, you could just say R1, which would encompass
R1,
all of them. Would you like it to apply to the R2 districts, which would be single-family homes or duplexes?
That's why we're designing. Yeah, can you describe to us, Jeff, what the R2, the makeup of an R2 district would be like?
Well, I think the best is I can provide you with examples of where R2 is located.
Yeah, zoning map would be
the south side of Main Street, starting here at the corner, working towards town to Judd, is all R2. The corner of Main Street and Traverse Street and the residential homes that are on the inside of that corner, those are R2. The homes on the north side of 3rd Street, between somewhere just past the Legion going all the way to Judd Street, that's another R2 zoning district. Victor's got the map pulled up. So if you can zoom in, I believe all of our R2 is below the bluff. And if we look at this. So like I mentioned, yep, the south side of Main Street right here, all of these homes and some homes along Bay, that's R2. The homes between Gardner and Judd is R2. And then the Main Street and Traverse Street area here, going to Bay, that's our R2 district.
Okay.
I feel like R1 is sort of the areas that are of most concern based on the comments from people here.
I agree. Okay, just for our on the real-time design here of a potential moratorium, just leave it at R1. Another thing that could make a moratorium extra fair would be something to do with people who had a license last year.
Do we have a lot of late people coming in, like after June, applying for licenses? We're sending out another letter this next couple weeks, right?
Yeah, last year, I think by middle of May, I think we had most of ours in. This year, it's been a little bit slower. There's been some turnover at the Harmari company with getting out. So we've been a little bit delayed in getting out our mailings.
Gotcha.
So we might be a little bit delayed on some of that, but.
I would also kind of argue that perhaps if you're not organized enough to get your short-term rental license, maybe it's not for you.
And you would potentially have close to 30 days to apply.
Yeah.
Most people who have a short-term rental, they're already booked.
The
calendars are already done, right?
All right.
They're done for the season. Whether they're licensed or not is really the question, but they're already booked.
Let's talk about the length. Victor, tell us again what your thoughts are regarding possible length.
So length, no court in Michigan has upheld a moratorium that's longer than 6 months. You can potentially renew a moratorium if there's new findings of fact that, have heightened or changed the direct threat to general welfare, public health and safety, but still no court has approved one or upheld one that's longer than 6 months. So the shorter is better, and also a shorter moratorium also allows for less likelihood of a successful legal challenge, which of course is not our primary concern, but should be concerned because if we can avoid litigation, we should try to avoid it and still, if we can solve this issue, so.
So 4 months would take us essentially into September. 5 months. October.
If you start on June 1st, yeah, June, July, August, October 1st, yeah.
Would the commission allow a suggestion?
Sure.
Comment?
Let's, yep.
From a legal perspective, I wouldn't use the word moratorium at all. I would say you're going to send out a notice saying that these licenses are seasonal. You have to secure your license by the 15th of June for 1 year. And anybody that has it by the 15th of June is licensed. We then enforce that. And then you don't have to use moratorium at all. Just do annual licensing for.
Has to be applied for and granted by X date.
That was in place already.
We do not have anything like that in place at this time because of situations where, let's say that someone doesn't own a home in Harbor Springs until August and they purchase it and choose to make it a seasonal rental or a short-term rental. They didn't have the opportunity to file before the deadline.
May I address the question?
Sure.
We live in AR, we live in agricultural or arbor, and is that still considered R1?
No.
Not if it's AR, right? So
No.
could that be part of what you fold into?
What color is AR?
White doesn't
It's the
have-
green square over here and on our arbor and over out there. If I can make a comment, most of the language in our AR district for single family use refers to either the R1A or R1B zoning district. So I think that, to me, it makes some sense to include the AR with the R1 districts.
Let me explore Mr. Kuppelman's idea, and that is, council could say, we can make a recommendation to council, and council could say, we're amending our short-term rental ordinance, and that all applications have to be received by June 1st or June 15th. And we're closing the door after that. And it would be for residential, it would be for business, it would be for every district. It's like, get organized, get your application in, or you can't do it this year in 2022. Victor, do you have any initial thoughts on that?
I would say that the legal risk is probably the same, because you are essentially changing the rules of the game on a short notice, and you could still find yourself in a challenge. I don't know if just doing a workaround, just not use the word moratorium, is really going to, convince the courts that, oh, this really wasn't a moratorium. I mean, we've held this meeting to say we're looking at a moratorium. Let's just not use the word. Of course, would look at the minutes here in the record here and say, you were just trying not to avoid it. So I don't necessarily accept that it's going to be, give us any more legal, strength.
Yeah,
But it's possible, because a moratorium is also just an ordinance as well. So because we have an ordinance already for short-term rentals, we would need to pass an ordinance passing a moratorium. Some communities impose a moratorium through resolution because they don't have an ordinance on book. We have an ordinance on book. So either way, council has to do an ordinance. If they do approve an ordinance, there's a certain, I don't know if it's 15 or 30 days before that actually goes into effect. So it's, there's time, I'd have to have Jim Raymer review that timeline, but June 1st might not even be, right, so, but.
Because I do see the advantage of the clarity and simplicity of what Mr. Copeland suggested. So.
Could we not just say residential districts, and that would include all residential areas, and it would exclude business district, which they're a business, they kind of belong in the business district. Does that work, or do we have to say R1 or whatever?
The more specific you can be, the better.
They're saying. All right, well, it sounds like there's interest enough in something that looks like this, whatever mechanism we use. So let's just make a decision here and decide if we have support for it or if we don't. So that being the case, I would say let's go back to a moratorium. We could get it in effect June 1. That would be ideal. The moratorium would be 6 months. Would cover R1 and AR.
Are we doing the full 6 months?
Full 6 months. Just to get something for us to react to. And the purpose of it is the welfare of the community. There's enough community concern about the nature and the loss of residential character in neighborhoods that it warrants a deeper exploration.
I think you might want to get a little more specific in welfare, because I'm not sure, of course, we'll be convinced that the character of the area is enough general. So you might point to, communities have pointed things like housing issues.
Shortage of housing.
Shortage of housing. I know Commissioner Tuschinski talked about, some of the nuisance related issues to short-term rentals that he believes he doesn't experience the same sort of nuisance issues from non-short-term rentals. So if that's the way the commission feels, they may want to include something like that. Those kinds of reasons, the more specific you are, character of the area is a much bigger and a harder one to convince that's, because character is a very fluid definition.
Sure.
Yeah, so.
And Victor, what's the actual mechanism that the commission would use to convey this recommendation to council?
A vote. I mean, you'd vote to.
I mean, is there a write-up or
whatever you guys decide here?
Work through?
whatever you decide here in a motion is what we will bring to
You
council.
would summarize it.
Yeah. In my best, my abilities to get to the council tomorrow.
All right.
Well, 3/5 of them are here, so.
It sounds like we would need a motion to recommend action to city council.
Yeah, I mean, of
some
course,
form.
the plan commission doesn't have to, and the council could still consider moratorium by themselves, right? But if, of course, there's strength if there's a
And they
unified plan
council may
commission.
not think this is a great idea and may not have, we know that.
Yeah, but I think what we would need, again, as I mentioned earlier, is the dates, as we already established, as a working template here, 6 months. Districts, which I think is very important, where, and really right now is the why, because I think is very important. Why, what direct threat are we addressing? A direct threat to welfare, and I think that would be for at least from protecting ourselves from a significant legal challenge on the issue. So.
And we just check conceptually, are people on board with the moratorium as just described? 6 months, R1 and AR.
Yes.
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 That wasn't a vote. Victor, how detailed do you need us to go right now with the rationale?
I would give as many reasons that you guys can come to consensus to. I mean, it can be, you can just shout out words and be like, hey.
There's some real time.
And I can bring those, council will take those words and then decide which ones are valid or not.
Can you pull some of that data from last August as well?
Pardon me?
Can we pull some of that data from last August? Just run through the list
The
of the.
complaints.
Right,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
Well, we definitely know what the nature of those were right now.
Yeah.
All right. Commissioners, if you would care to give Victor some rationale, feel free.
I would say the overall safety of the residents and not knowing, who's coming and going and, what their proclivities may or may not be.
The transient nature of.
Yep.
Nature.
It's like affordable housing is an issue and.
It's a big issue.
Housing availability for full-time people. Rick, what were some of your concerns?
Well, the safety issue, because you never know what's going on. I remember at last year's meeting, one person complained to short-term rentals and she was met at the door with a person with an AK-4 rifle. And that is a scary thing. And I think goes against the safety of the residents because you don't know. The threat of what happened in Pennsylvania is disturbing for people. You don't know, you can start a shootout there. It's been documented a couple of times now.
So safety.
Safety, they're against basically the code because they're a business and they don't belong in a residential district. Because the Supreme Court in Michigan said that they don't belong in a residential district in 2019. And so, we sort of shouldn't even be discussing it, but
There's I have a reasonable concern about like traffic and vehicle safety, especially where I live. There are a couple of short-term rentals. People don't really understand that a lot of the houses have young children and pets. And a lot of other stuff when they're just out on a tear for the weekend.
And I think there's a health factor to it that, you know, the one next to me, they leave their trash out all the time. And raccoons, squirrels, everybody gets into it and the trash is around the neighborhood.
Can there be a reference to that it impacts the neighbor's right to enjoy their own property? Which is a fundamental right.
Would also suggest bringing up that this is also a reflection of a continuous concern of several community members throughout public meetings that we've had last year and this year have expressed these concerns. So it was not just, because what I'm afraid, if we do say, go down the safety route, we do have then on the record, the police chief saying, you know, we only have a handful of complaints. So that in and of itself probably wouldn't be, the record needs to show that this short-term rentals are legitimately causing that. And so our police enforcement record doesn't show that, but maybe the community's feedback shows that community members are
So we
expressing.
reference those specific meetings that we've
Yeah,
had.
yeah.
So those notes, minutes get brought into this whole thing if necessary.
The other one we hear all the time is noise and smoke.
I was gonna say,
One more
maybe,
Okay,
This is a pause, as you're describing, that you're not doing what I suggested, which is an annual license beginning the 15th. If it's a pause so that you can study, all you have to do is use the anecdotal information from the last big meeting. All of those things, fires outside, parking in the streets, garbage, all of those things are things that have been raised and need to be studied. And that is perfect justification for a pause.
great. Okay, Victor, do you feel got enough to work with?
I think you, I think Emily wanted.
oh, I just wanted to say, animal welfare. I know we have a rental behind us and it doesn't happen often, but you know, they bring their pets, usually a dog, and they howl sometimes the entire time that the homeowner is gone, whether it's 2 hours or 6 hours. So I don't mind the noise is fine, but just I feel bad for the pet that it's someplace that's not, it doesn't know, and it's sad the entire time. So.
Okay,
I got something now.
all right, quickly, yeah, for the.
One more thing, and this is kind of vague, but loss of the foundation of your community. I mean, I know people that, you know, they need nurses at the hospital, they need, I mean, I think it was 150 positions they have now. When you
I
teach
think Victor covered that with like causes potentially a shortage of housing for
Yeah.
full-time people.
for the foundation people of our community, that's really.
Yep, and again, this is all we're asking, recommending council is to consider a pause, 6-month pause.
Based on these reasons in the AR and R1 district.
Right.
For 6 months.
For 6 months, starting June 1, if it's possible to start June 1, as soon as possible, really. All right, would anyone like to wrap this up and make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
And the motion, describe the motion?
Pardon me?
Would you describe the motion?
No, what everybody just said. Make a motion of it.
Yeah, it would be helpful if you would say it so we know what we're all, that we're in sync.
Would you like me to recap?
Okay, yes.
I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
It sounds like we have a
Write my
motion on the
motion.
table by Al Dyke, seconded by Barry Lustgarten for a moratorium for the issuance of short-term rental licenses within the R1 and AR districts, starting June 1 and proceeding for 6 months, based on the comments that Victor has documented for safety and whatnot. Does that sound like a recap of the motion?
Yeah.
Would you like to
To address the threat to general welfare, public welfare, safety and health? And for all the reasons listed.
We like a roll call.
Yeah, we do have second, right? Who seconded?
Barry.
Barry, thank you. All right, yeah, let's have a roll call vote, Jeff.
All right.
Next
Toma.
question.
So we better get to the vote, Charlie.
You want the vote?
Yes.
Bob Toman,
No.
George Pete,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Boudet. Oh,
I'm recused.
recusing, thank you. Barry Lustgarten,
Yes.
Al Dyke,
Yes.
Rick Tarczynski,
Yes.
Vanessa Warren. Oh, sorry, she's absent. Emily Dubé.
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Yes, what were the totals?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 votes yes, 1 recuse and 1 no.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Commissioners, any other business you'd like to talk about?
I don't think we can in a special meeting.
Right. It's a special meeting. You can't talk about anything else. Good. All right. Members of the public, thank you again so much for your thoughtful, helpful, and thorough comments. We really appreciate it.
Take
All
this to
right.
council on May 2nd, which is Monday night at 7, so.
All right, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all for serving.
Hi, Charlie. Yep.